welcome everyone. We're glad that you're here with us on this very cold day in Minnesota as we talk for planning for IEP meetings for students with mental health needs. Jamie, you can go to the next slide. My name is Jeannie. I'm a PACER advocate. I've been with PACER for about 3.5 years now. I have two kiddos who are, well, no longer kiddos. They're young adults who are both on IEPs. Karen, do you want to share your intro?
Sure. Hi, my name is Karen Malka. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I've also been at Pacer about a little over 3 years, and I have two grown daughters of my own who also grew up with both mental health and learning challenges.
Next slide, Jamie. So if you're not familiar with PACER, you can read about our organization here or visit our website at pacer.org to learn more about our programs and services. A little bit of additional background. The work Karen and I do falls under PACER Center's Children's Mental Health Project. And our project focus is to provide you with information and resources to help you learn to advocate for your child with mental health needs in special education. Our workshop is created with Minnesota parents in mind. If you're a parent that lives outside of Minnesota, please note that your state level laws may be different. We're planning to host a question and answer time at the end of the presentation. So as Jamie mentioned, please feel free to write questions into the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can later. Next slide, Jamie. So what will we be talking about today? We'll start with the not super exciting, but nonetheless important components of the IEP and why learning about these components matters for your advocacy. We'll talk about the process of preparing for IEP meeting discussions, examples of issues that might come up in a meeting, how to navigate advocacy communications, and what you can do if you find yourself in disagreement with the team. Next slide. Advocacy success it's really founded on having a working knowledge of how IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, relates to IEP development and your rights within the special education process. I know from personal experience, Karen too, that it can feel overwhelming to be confronted with learning a complex system like special education at a time when you likely already feel overwhelmed. It would be so much easier if someone could just tell us what to do. But there are a couple of important things to consider. First, the IEP is individualized based on your student's needs. So the effectiveness of your participation in making decisions about your child's unique education program requires understanding how the system works and how to exert your rights in the process. Knowing special education laws and processes is like having a template for IEP problem solving. It's the same set of laws, rights, and processes that are used to address ongoing or new concerns and disagreements related to the IEP. So when you take time to learn the system and your rights, you're then able to apply the same process to bring current and future questions, problems, and ideas to the IEP team to resolve concerns and disagreements. So moving on to our legs. The purpose of IDEA, quoted from the law, is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And one thing to note here when we look at that definition of IDEA is that the intent isn't just to get a student from one year to the next at school, but we're also always wanting to be looking at that future picture too, because part of that obligation under IDEA is to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. We can think about IDEA as a stool with four main legs of support. The first leg of our stool represents a law called Child Find. Child find is the obligation of districts to identify, locate, and evaluate children who may need support for their disabilities. Legs 2 and 3 represent tenets under IDEA stating that all children with disabilities who qualify for special education services are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, otherwise known by the acronym FAPE, which guarantees, as the name suggests, the right to a public education that's free and appropriate to kids with disabilities in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. Least restrictive environment refers to the obligation of districts to educate children with disabilities in the same school environments as their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent appropriate for that student. Our fourth and final leg represents your right to parent participation. This means you have the right to be actively involved in decisions about your child's educational program, to receive written notice and opportunity to disagree with any proposed changes to your child's IEP. Karen will talk a little bit more about this later. And you have the right to review your students' educational records. Next slide, Jamie. Another analogy here will help us break down the structure of the IEP. So we can think of IEP development like building a house. So by this I mean that one step in the planning process lays the foundation for the next. If the team doesn't give adequate attention and planning to each step, it may result in an IEP that doesn't effectively meet your students' needs. You know that the building of a house requires following a logical order of construction if it's going to be a sound structure. You'd have a really big problem if your builder tried to start adding on a roof before any support structure was put in place to hold it up. The same concept is true when it comes to developing a student's IEP. The IEP is developed from a summary of information called, get ready, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, which is a mouthful, also known by the acronym PLAAFP or PLAFP, which in my opinion is also a bit of a messy mouthful. But in spite of the somewhat goofy sounding acronym, the present levels statement provides critical student information, including current academic and functional performance levels, a description of their strengths and challenges, relevant data assessments and classroom observations, information about how their disability impacts their progress in the general education curriculum, parent input, and details regarding important areas like communication, social emotional development, behavior, and transition planning, if applicable. It's the data in the present levels that creates a baseline to measure subsequent progress and that supports the further building of our house in the area of goals and services. Services in the IEP support a student's ability to access their education, including participation in the general education curriculum with their peers, meeting annual educational goals, and taking part in school-based extracurricular and non-academic activities. Examples of student services that they might receive could include social worker minutes, speech language pathology services, occupational therapy, medical services, or transportation. Once the IEP team has decided what services a child needs, a decision is made by the team, including you as a member of the team, about where services will be provided. This is called placement. As we discussed before when we looked at least restrictive environment, the team must make sure the child's placement provides them with the opportunity to learn with children who do not have disabilities to the greatest extent appropriate. This layered progression of IEP development is intended to ensure your child's IEP provides them with a free and appropriate public education. The IEP is a legal document. It spells out your child's learning needs, services the school will provide, where they will be provided, and how progress will be measured. As I mentioned before, the key word associated with the IEP is individualized. An IEP is designed to meet the unique needs of your student with a disability based on identified needs and strengths through tailored educational goals, services, and supports. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. So this slide provided a super quick overview of the IEP. PACER has a wonderful resource called the Guide to the Individual Education Program for Minnesota Parents on our website for you to learn more about IEPs. We have handouts on our website that talk more about present levels, least restrictive environment, and more, if you want to dig further into those. We also have some great trainings that go into greater depth on these topics and more topics on our YouTube channel, Pacer Center YouTube channel. All right, Jamie, next slide. If your kiddo or teen has been struggling with behaviors for any length of time, it's likely that you've been given varying and possibly even sometimes contradictory advice from doctors, therapists, school staffs, relatives, and well-meaning friends. I know from experience that this can feel confusing, overwhelming, and sometimes frustrating. So as you get ready to meet with the IEP team, remind yourself that while school staff are the experts in their particular field, you are the expert on your child. This knowledge that you know your child best can increase your confidence going into IEP meetings. One helpful strategy for setting a positive tone at IEP meetings is to lead the way in framing behavior as an opportunity to learn about a child's strengths and needs. We can think of behavior as a student's form of self-advocacy. Team discussions offer the chance to dig into why a student might be experiencing challenges. What isn't working for them at school? Are there learning, attention, social, emotional, communication, medical, or other disability needs that may not yet be acknowledged, understood, or adequately met? Has your child been given the opportunity to learn and practice the skills they need to regulate their emotions and meet behavioral expectations at school? If we as parents or the IEP team have become accustomed to viewing our child's actions as intentional misbehavior, then we're more likely to look for a quick fix, such as confrontation or imposing punitive consequences in the moment of escalation. This response can sometimes serve to increase problem behaviors and potentially further alienate a student who may already be struggling with self-doubt. An example of this would be a student who is frequently removed from the classroom as a disciplinary action because they're using inappropriate language. The parent, receiving calls from the district about her son's behavior, decides to use the problem as an opportunity to learn more and reaches out to ask the team for observation data. The parent discovers that her son uses hostile, inappropriate language during times when students are asked to take turns reading aloud in class. This student struggles with reading, and he shares privately with the parent that he would rather be removed from class than be embarrassed by other students who laugh or make fun of him when he reads slowly or mispronounces words. The student has learned that using threatening language results in removal from class, and therefore removal from an emotionally painful and stressful circumstance. He may not yet have learned the skills needed to identify why he's feeling distressed. He may not be aware that he has reading needs that can be accommodated or met with appropriate support. The capacity to identify our emotional, learning, or other needs and put these needs into words for effective self-advocacy is developmentally advanced. It takes patience and practice to develop these skills. When we take time to search for the meaning behind a behavior, we give ourselves and our child the opportunity to ask questions, to explore what else might be going on that could be creating stress, anxiety, withdrawal, or anger. Teaching emotional regulation and self-advocacy skills is a process, and it requires a supportive team approach to IEP development. Sometimes it's the parent that takes a leadership role to exemplify shifting the lens of understanding and problem solving from behavior management to supportive skill building related to student behaviors. Next slide, Jamie. Okay, concrete strategies. Let's talk about action steps to empower your IEP meeting preparation. First, review your child's educational documents before the meeting. These documents include, at a minimum, your child's current IEP and their most recent special education evaluation. It's also helpful to make sure you have copies of relevant IEP progress reports, report cards, disciplinary or incident reports, and prior written notices that may have been provided by the school. Taking time to learn and understand the data your school is using from these documents to propose IEP decisions is your most powerful tool for advocacy. We know that it can be overwhelming to try to read through and interpret educational documents. It's our role as PACER advocates to help you understand these documents, so please reach out if you'd like assistance. If you find that you don't have copies of documents you need, contact your case manager and request to have them sent to you prior to the meeting. Reviewing documents and taking notes ahead of the meeting gives you a chance to ask questions and seek clarifications from the case manager prior to the meeting if needed, so you're ready to engage with the team in discussion and planning. Keep in mind that IEP decisions are based on data, not opinions. School records provide the information that's used when making IEP decisions regarding goals, supports, and services. We strongly recommend reading through the IEP and most recent special education evaluation report before an IEP meeting. Referring to the school's own data and insights as you advocate for your child at the meeting is a powerful way to connect the team to discussion about effective solutions. Next, prioritize and list your concerns before the meeting. Sharing your list with the case manager ahead of the meeting can help the team prepare to address your concerns. Take time to define the issues clearly. Provide examples to help with understanding. And I want to emphasize that particular piece. The more you can take specific examples of what you're observing, even what you're hearing in terms of feedback from the school regarding how a student's disability is impacting them at school, why the need exists, and why further discussion needs to occur to address it in the IEP, the more they're going to be able to understand and envision specifically what you're advocating for, and understand the problem. So this process not only clarifies your goals and perspectives for the team, but it also helps you to stay focused on the primary concerns you want to resolve at the meeting. If you've attended IEP meetings previously, you're aware that it can be easy to become sidetracked. Writing out your prioritized objectives can help you and the team stay focused. Finally, bring your own ideas to propose at the meeting. If your child is able to share ideas with you that you can bring to the team for consideration, or if they're able to and willing to attend the meeting themselves, this can provide an excellent source of creative options to explore. Be willing to listen to the ideas of all team members. Everyone at the table brings value through their own expertise and experience. Keep the discussion focused on planning and problem solving rather than criticism or blame. It's the work of the full team coming together that's intended to empower a well-rounded system of idea sharing and problem solving to create an effective educational program for your student. Your knowledge of your child, your ideas, and your willingness to lead by example in the collaborative efforts of the team are critical to the process. next slide. And Karen, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, thanks, Teeny. Okay. Here are some questions you may want to consider and discuss with the team as you explore ways to understand your child's behavioral needs. What is the challenging behavior? When and where does it occur? How often? Who is around when it happens? Is there a relationship between my child's disability and his or her behavior? What has been tried so far? What has worked? What has not worked? What do I think the behavior might mean? What need does it meet? What are my child's strengths, and can we use them to build a plan? What plan would I like to suggest for trying next? When will we meet again to talk about the progress and needs of my child? Once you have a better understanding of the behavior, consider asking the team about additional supports at school that your child may benefit from. At the end of the meeting, ask for an action plan in writing. If you requested some changes to the IEP services or accommodations, remind the team you will be looking for the prior written notice that will address the changes that you requested and will provide you with a response from the district either agreeing or refusing to make those changes. If they refuse, they must tell you why in writing. You could also ask for information about additional resources that may be available in your community. Work together. As the parent of a child with a disability or mental health and behavioral needs, your role is important. By working together with your child and the school, you can increase your child's chance for behavioral success. Next slide. So here we have an example scenario with a sixth grade student who we will call Jane. Jane has had an IEP since first grade and is being served under the emotional behavioral disorders category in a federal setting too. This means she spends more than 21% of her school day receiving special education services outside of her general education classroom. Since returning from winter break, she has missed 3 days of school, has been tardy for 6 days of school, and has eloped from the classroom 10 times. She was also recently suspended for 3 days for aggressive behavior. Her parents have re- her parents have a re-entry and IEP meeting on Monday morning and are looking for help knowing how to best advocate for their daughter. In speaking with her parents, they share that while they do struggle to get her to go to school and she can be defiant at home, she is not aggressive. So they are unsure what is causing the increased behaviors at school. If we were working with Jane's parents to help them prepare for the IEP meeting, we would discuss the following points and questions for the parent to bring up at the meeting. Based on Jane's present level of functioning, this includes academic, social, and emotional. What are her current needs? What are the current goals on her IEP, and do they support her current needs? Do the goals need to be changed, or do new goals need to be added? Are the current goals appropriate? For example, if she is currently self-advocating for herself at 10% of the time, it may not be a reasonable expectation to have a goal that she will self-advocate 90% of the time. Do the services in the IEP support Jane in building skills so that she can make progress on her goals? For example, a goal that a student will regulate their emotions may not be appropriate if they have not yet learned how to identify emotions. We cannot regulate what we can't identify. Based on Jane's current needs, are the accommodations appropriate? Does she need different or more accommodations to help her be successful? Is there current and accurate data needed to determine why Jane is struggling? For example, if there was no sensory profile done on the evaluation, we may not be aware that Jane can become easily overstimulated, and this can lead to her avoidant and eloping behaviors. Is there enough information about the triggers and patterns related to her challenging behavior at school? Once you have discussed these questions with the team, you can work together to identify the next steps. Does there need to be more assessments done? What accommodations should be added? How should goals be rewritten to better address her present level of functioning? Next slide. Evaluating behavior need. If a child is not making progress or there are new behavioral challenges, parents may ask for a functional behavior assessment or an FBA as a standalone assessment or as part of a reevaluation. This will help the IEP team identify positive behavior interventions and supports that the school can put into place in order to help the student in making progress on their IEP goals. An FBA should help the IEP team find ways to positively support a child at school by developing a proactive plan that helps reduce and/or eliminate the challenging behaviors. IEP teams must consider positive behavioral interventions, strategies, and supports that address the behavior needs of that student on an IEP. Information for an FBA should be gathered from a variety of sources, including other assessments completed as part of an evaluation, behavior, incident reports and logs, formal and informal observations, formal and informal input from parents, educators, and the student themselves. The main purpose of an FBA is to determine all potential reasons that a child is using behaviors. If we consider that behavior is a way to meet a need, the question to answer is what need is being met, or what need is currently not being met. To answer this overarching question, the IEP team needs to consider many questions and understand them in relationship to one another. Because of this, it is important that the information in the FBA be as specific as possible. For example, what do we mean when we say disruptive behavior? Is it talking to peers, blurting out loud, yelling, throwing things? What do we mean when we say a child is aggressive? Is it yelling, hitting, punching, threatening others? Using action words provides clarity to the team about exactly what behaviors are getting in the way of learning. Are there any specific places, times, or events when behaviors are more or less likely to occur? For example, is it occurring in the classroom during lessons versus lunch recess, or hallways, bathrooms, locker room, free time? Music or Fayed can be loud and overwhelming to some students. Math or reading can be difficult and frustrating if academic skills are lagging. Especially for older students, reading, writing, and even math are required for many different classes. If these tasks are challenging for the student, behaviors may emerge when asked to do those tasks in other classes. Is the student affected by unexpected changes, peer interactions in or out of the classroom, expectations and demands from adults? Once the questions are answered and information is gathered, the team can begin to identify interventions and accommodations that can be helpful. Positive behavioral interventions are planned interventions that take place before the onset of a problem behavior, before escalation of these behaviors, or to prevent the behaviors from reoccurring. If it is possible to identify events in the environment that contribute to problem behaviors, such as class size, teacher-child interaction, curriculum, it may be possible to modify those events sufficiently to reduce the behavior. If a teacher knows, for instance, that Jane becomes argumentative when seated next to a particular student because she and the student have a history of disagreements outside of school, simply separating the two students may solve the problem. If Jane's arguments with her peer result from a lack of social skills, providing social skills instruction as part of her program may give Jane the skills she needs to get along with the other student. Positive behaviors are taught and, where necessary, retaught using the same strategies that are used oftentimes in teaching academic skills. When children use the positive behavior skills that are expected, they should be noticed, reinforced, or rewarded for using these skills. When they display negative behaviors, adults who work with the student should first redirect them and, when deemed appropriate, impose meaningful consequences that make sense and that are meaningful to the child. For example, if a student spray paints graffiti on a school wall, having them clean the walls is a consequence that is designed to help them understand the damage that spray paint does to an environment and helps them to understand the difficulty and expense of cleaning up after the damage. This is much more effective than suspension for teaching a desired behavioral skill. Educational needs matter, and so do behavior needs. Some students who may use behaviors that put the safety of themselves or others at risk may benefit from a crisis plan. A crisis plan should be proactive and positive, reduces reliance on restrictive interventions such as restraints, seclusions, dismissal, suspension from school, addresses how adults can respond to behavior rather than react to behavior, builds on positive relationships, utilizes both school and community resources, be implemented with consistency, should be reviewed and updated as needed. Environmental changes to reduce, eliminate inappropriate behaviors should be noted. Skills training to increase frequency of appropriate behaviors. Strategies for teaching new skills or replacing problem behaviors supports for students to use appropriate behaviors in various settings. Next slide. Options for school supports. Thinking about positive supports and interventions, Minnesota has worked to provide several options for school support for children with mental health needs. Not all of these options are offered in every school district, and not every student can benefit from them when they are offered. But here are a few which you may have already heard about. CTSS and school-based mental health connect children with trained mental health professionals in the school building. CTSS, which stands for Children's Therapeutic Services and Supports, is a package of mental health services that includes psychotherapy and skills training to help a child reach their treatment goals. Some schools employ CTSS workers, but they may also contract with outside providers to connect a child with these services. School-based mental health services are therapeutic services provided during the school day by a trained mental health professional who does not work for the school district. Schools can also implement positive behavior interventions and supports across the entire school or for individual students. Positive behavioral interventions and supports are based on the assumption that children's behavior can be changed by teaching and reinforcing expected behaviors. Part of helping children change behaviors through teaching is recognizing and rewarding kids when they use those expected behaviors and enforcing meaningful consequences when there are violations of those expected behaviors. Schools may try a plan called response to interventions prior to evaluating for a special education. These interventions are tried for a limited amount of time, and schools should be measuring the effectiveness of those interventions. School social workers and guidance counselors may be used to support students who need help with self-advocacy, learning coping skills, or working on relationship building. They, along with occupational therapists, speech language clinicians, or psychologists, can be included as a related service provider on a student's IEP to develop skills and strategies that help manage the symptoms of their mental health needs. Paraprofessional support in the classroom can also be included in the IEP to help remind students to use those skills and strategies, help with implementing positive behavior interventions, to help keep a child safe, and to help redirect a child before behaviors escalate. Lastly, Minnesota has many school choice options that parents may consider. Minnesota allows children to open a role in a district where they do not live, provided that space is available. All charter schools are public schools in Minnesota and are required to provide special education services to their students. There are also online learning options. Some traditional public schools are starting to provide more online learning options, and some charter schools offer online schooling. For some students with mental health needs, a change in environment may be a helpful intervention. Next slide. Dispute resolution options. And then remember, near the beginning where we touched on the prior written notice, anytime there is a proposed change to the IEP, the school should provide you with a PWN or prior written notice. After an IEP meeting, the changes you and the team decided on, were proposed, or the ones you requested should be reflected in a PWN. Anytime you meet with the team to discuss concerns, and you request changes, we encourage you to send a follow-up email to thank them for their time and seek confirmation and clarification on what was discussed and anything agreed to or requested. This can help ensure clear communication. In the prior written notice, the team will state the proposed changes. If they refuse to make changes that parents have requested, they must tell them why in writing. Parents always have a right to disagree and request dispute resolution. The first step would be to disagree in writing within 14 days of receiving the prior written notice. If you do not disagree in writing, the proposed changes will go into effect after that 14-day window. So it is critically important anytime you disagree that you do so in writing within the 14-day window on the prior written notice. After disagreeing, you can request an IEP team meeting or a conciliation conference. A conciliation conference is a meeting to hear why you disagree and what your concerns are and what resolution you would like to see. The school has 10 days to hold the conciliation conference and must send you a conciliation memo within 5 days following that meeting. If the team still does not agree, you could consider requesting a mediation or a facilitated team meeting where the Minnesota Department of Education sends in a mediator or facilitator to help with this process. These are meetings PACER advocates are happy to help you prepare for and navigate, and depending on the circumstances, we can sometimes attend with parents. Our role is mainly to train parents on how to advocate for their child. In summary, we know that it can be intimidating and emotional and sometimes frustrating to navigate the IEP meetings, especially if your child is struggling with emotional and behavioral needs. But knowing the process, what questions to ask, and learning how to partner with the IEP team can make it a more rewarding process for both you and your child. PACER advocates are always here to answer questions and help you learn your rights and how to advocate for your child so that they continue to make progress and feel successful and supported. Next slide. Before we go into our question and answer section, I just wanted to mention that currently there is a series of trainings, our PACER Parent Leadership Training, which helps parents learn how to advocate for their child specifically and for the larger system. So how to use your story to help change systems. So whether that is advocating within the school district, whether or at the state capitol, how to become a parent leader in the community. Next slide. Okay, I think we can go to question and answer. I'll go ahead and read some of these. Okay, what would be the next steps? Let's see, what would be the next steps when working with a school not following an IEP? Put my camera on too, Jeannie, hang on. Okay, what would be the next steps working with a school not following an IEP that they adopted for a transfer student? Conversations have been had with IEP case manager, school social worker, principal, and special education director. Student is failing several classes while being threatened to be kicked out of class, but not receiving the supports that are written into the IEP. Um, the first step, I mean, it sounds like you may have done this already, but to have that meeting with the team. If there are specific things that should be added in the IEP that are not in there, you can make a formal request to have certain things added. And again, if the district is refusing that, ask them to put that in writing in the prior written notice. Also, if you've tried these steps and the school is still not following the IEP, you have a right to file a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Ed, and they have attorneys that will do a investigation of your complaint and make a decision based on if they find that there have been any violations by the school district. Anything else on that, Jeannie?
No, no.
Okay, next one. Um, What's the process in Minnesota if a parent decides they no longer want their child to be served by an IEP? So you do have the option to exit your student from special education. You would want to make a written request for that, stating that you no longer want to have your child on an IEP and have services. And then there will be a written document provided to remove your student from that. You do have a year from exiting special education to reinstate it if you feel that things are not going well. Um, One thing, just want to mention, before exiting your student, really think about what the reasons are. Are the reasons, is it just not helping? Do you feel that they've met their goals and they don't need it? Are you just tired of working with the team and you just don't want to deal with them anymore? Just really think about what those reasons are, because there are protections for students, especially with behavioral challenges, by having an IEP. So really consider what the reasoning is before doing that. But yes, there is a process to do that. Uh, what is the timeline after requesting an FBA in Minnesota? It's 30 days. So when you make that request, um, they should be providing you a prior written notice, either agreeing or refusing to conduct the functional behavior assessment. Once they agree to it, they'll have a plan for it. Once you sign off on it, it's 30 days. Um, that's in Minnesota.
I think
If they, yeah, go ahead, Jeannie.
oh, I'm sorry, Karen.
No, 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 go ahead.
I think the clarification is as soon as possible, but not more than 30 days. So,
Yes,
because
yes,
typically when a request for FBA, standalone FBA is made, it's because a student is really struggling. So,
yep,
um, yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that
yes, thank you.
you can ask for
Thank
it
you.
as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
that would be the hope, that they would do it as soon as possible. And like Jeannie said, not more than 30 days. Um, let's see, next question. My son's teacher said when my son starts ninth grade, he won't have a para anymore. Why does the high school have no paras? So again, if the current IEP states that there is paraprofessional supports, not having paraprofessional supports would be a change to the IEP. So you could ask them to put that in writing, and then you can disagree with that decision. So any changes to an IEP need to go through that process. Uh,
Can I add something to
yeah, of
that?
course.
Yeah, okay. Um, Schools are really struggling to hire pairs right now. Um, Minnesota has been clear that while we completely understand, obviously, the staffing challenges that schools are having, that districts are still obligated to meet the needs identified in the student's special education evaluation. So sometimes, if a district isn't able to provide a para, part of that conversation, once the parent has requested the proposed change to the IEP to have no more para in a prior written notice, is to say the needs still exist. Here's what the need looks like. Here's how having a para allowed my student to make progress in that circumstance. So you can explore ideas like, what are we sure, first of all, that we have to give up the para? If we do, are there certain circumstances when my student struggles most where they may still have access to a para? If there are no paras at all, how will we still effectively meet the needs to enable my student to make progress at school? That was all, Karen.
Next one. I'm struggling with the idea put forth that staff relies on data, not opinions, when creating IEPs. My child's IEP relies almost exclusively on staff opinions collected in external interviews. The support offered in the IEP are very limited and, more importantly, do not provide me with descriptions of specific strategies and learning interventions. In other words, I am not told what it is they are actually doing in the special education classroom. When I ask our case manager if I can observe personally, I am told that it would be a violation of confidentiality. I feel I am being kept in the dark, which does not align with the best interests of my child or the team as a whole. How could I frame this concern differently in a new way that might lead to me becoming a more directly informed parent? So it's a really good question, and it's something that we deal with a lot here at Pacer. So just going to try and unpack this a little bit. Um, so if you're feeling that an IEP is built mainly off of opinions and not data, the first thing is to ask for that data. Um, it- when collecting information for an evaluation, it needs to come from a variety of sources. It needs to come from those interviews with the student and teachers and parents, but it also needs to include more formal as well as informal assessments. Also needs to include observations in different settings. So not doing the observation in the same classroom all the time, maybe doing one at lunch, maybe doing one in music class. So if you're feeling that that was not done in the evaluation, you could bring that up, that you don't feel that they gather data from enough sources. Um, in the IEP, there are the goals, and then under the goals are the objectives, which are supposed to be more specific. If you are in disagreement with the goals and you'd like to rewrite them, you could request that, and again, ask for, if they refuse, ask again for that in a prior written notice, and then you could disagree with that decision. There's also a process called a facilitated team meeting, um, where you sit down with the team together along with a facilitator who is assigned by the Department of Ed, who's a neutral party, and they help facilitate a discussion between the family and the school. And you basically start from scratch and write the IEP together. So you could ask for that process. I do want to mention it is a voluntary process, so the school can disagree to engage in that. But most of the time they're willing to do that. Um, you could also talk about progress reports. If you feel that you're not getting progress reports as often as you should be, you could request to get those more often so you have a better sense of progress and how things are going. The other piece is we guide parents a lot about asking different types of questions. So if you're feeling they gathered data and it's all about when is your child not behaving well, when is your child not doing well, ask the questions about when they do well. Ask the questions about when is the behavior not happening, not just what's not working, what is working, and ask some of those variety of questions, and sometimes you can get more information from that. I hope that covered everything. I know it's a big question. Um, will you give specific wording for accommodation request? This is where I found frustrating. Yeah, feel free to call us and speak with an advocate. Oftentimes we work with parents to identify needs and then discuss together what may be some appropriate accommodations to ask for. And sometimes we can help you with that wording if that's something that you need. And again, if you're getting pushback from the school when you're asking to add an accommodation or change an accommodation, ask them to put it in writing in a prior written notice that they're refusing to make those changes. If my child, 6 years old, has a PTSD diagnosis, a significant, and the chaos of the setting for a classroom is a constant trigger, how do we advocate for him? It's a mental health response and overstimulation, not disobedience. School admits it's an issue, but can do little to change it. This is another thing that we see happen often. Um, Again, the first step is to have that meeting with the school, share your concerns. Sometimes bringing in an outside therapist who your child is working with, or a county case manager who has spoken to your child and just has also realized that the environment is becoming triggering, having them attend meetings with you can be supportive and helpful. Um, also, talking about identifying triggers. Sometimes, asking to move down to a level 3 setting. And again, if the school refuses, ask for that prior written notice. If you still feel your student needs that level 4, but the setting that they're in the specific school is just not working because of the makeup of the class, you can explore asking the district to place your child in a different level 4 setting in a neighboring district or a different school. So I think talking about the concerns first, identifying those needs, identifying those triggers. If the behaviors have increased or there's a change, you could ask for that functional behavior assessment, and just gathering data that identifies what the triggers are and how you can address it.
Can I add something quick
Yeah,
to that, Karen?
of course.
I just want to emphasize data collection again and asking questions. And sometimes when it comes to FBA or IEP team discussions, thinking outside the box about how we're asking the right questions can be really helpful. It sounds, Robert, like you have an understanding of your students' responses, where they're coming from, why they happen, and why your child responds the way that he does. Those are all really important conversations to bring to the IEP team. And the more you can break those down into examples, not only examples of indicators of stress triggers. So instead of a district looking at behavior once it's already escalated, making sure they're taking a look at what's happening before that. So, for example, we all know our kids, we all know their indicators. What does it look like for your child when he starts to become agitated or distressed? Does his face turn red? Does he fidget? Does he, what are those indications so we can start looking at how to come alongside him when he's just starting to feel overwhelmed or stressed in that environment? Um, what works at home? What works in other environments? Karen mentioned earlier having a therapist or outside provider come, but oftentimes home examples, you can say, when we start to notice that he's becoming triggered by something in a certain environment, home or outside of home, here's what it looks like. Here's what we know doesn't work. This will escalate further. Here's what we know does work. How can we translate that into the school environment and put it in the IEP? Because remember that IEP is intended to be individualized. And oftentimes it's just digging a little bit further to ask those questions that can produce some pretty big, significant steps forward in the IEP team's planning for the student's educational plan.
Great. And I'll just add to, um, lost my train of thought, actually. Two things. So reminding the team that the disobedience that they're calling it or that they see, that's not the problem, that's the symptom. And reminding them to look through that lens, that the problem is the PTSD and the behavior is the symptom of that. You also have the right to request that the team have some disability specific training. So, asking that they get some training about PTSD specifically, that sometimes can be helpful so they have a better understanding of the disability. Next one. Are there ever trainings, accommodations to have workshops in Spanish? Yes, so we do have a multicultural team here at Pacer, and we have advocates who speak Spanish as well as Somali. So give us a call, or those trainings that are in other languages may also be on our website.
We have lots of those on our website. So, and we have them on the Pacer YouTube channel. Almost, yeah, significant number of trainings in Spanish are on our Pacer Center YouTube channel.
And one thing I wanted to mention too, because at the end of the question, it says to utilize a translator. So our advocates aren't called in just to be a translator, they're called in to be advocates. So if the parent is struggling, with navigating special education, that Spanish speaking or Somali speaking advocate will come in to help advocate. Um, but if you're just in need of translator, services, the district should be providing that. Um, Current second grader has an IEP since kindergarten. What are the steps to take if a child moves to a new school, for example, next month? So if your student is moving to a new school, you can reach out to the director of special education, let them know that your student is coming, and ask to have an IEP meeting right away to go over the IEP so that the new school is aware of it and they can plan accordingly. Um, that's usually they will go off of the IEP that comes with your child. And then based on the new environment, if they're seeing that there's a need for different accommodations or less accommodations, the team will work with you on that. Does the principal need to be involved? Can you request people not be on the team? Um, I think it depends on the situation. I know in situations involving suspensions or behaviors, principals are usually involved. Um, there are people that are required to be on a team. A principal is not one of those people, if it's an IEP team meeting. So it really just depends on what the meeting is about.
And
Right, GD,
schools,
anything?
yeah, schools don't have an obligation to change a staff member. It can't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you express to your case manager that your concerns and ask if there are other alternatives, it can't hurt to ask, but they don't have an obligation to make a change to a staff member.
But definitely if you're feeling that a principal or any staff member has become part of your team and you're really struggling with that, or they're trying to, I don't know, you can always call us and ask for some talking points or, just some help with that. Um, where would I find the best resource as far as legislation laws regarding to this? I'm not sure what this is. I don't, if it's related to the IEP. Um, there's a lot of things on our website. Also, the Minnesota Department of Education has a lot of information on their website as well. You can type in in the search bar, keyword, and they often have a lot of information regarding to statutes and legislation related to IDEA and special education law. Um, Someone just said, thank you. Thank you also for attending. My child just turned 6 years old and is in kindergarten. Due to my child getting sick from school, my child isn't able to attend anytime soon. We have medical notes supporting our son's attendance. What are our rights as far as a meeting before an IEP meeting? The principal wants us to have a meeting. I'm just tired of not knowing what I need to legally share with the team to protect my son. So it sounds like your son has an illness that's requiring him to be out for an extended period of time. Um, Again, being as transparent as you can or as open as you can be beneficial. But we definitely understand there's situations where a family may not want to share everything. Having a doctor's note can be helpful. And also be asking for possibly homebound learning when students are home because of an illness. Um, Homebound learning is the school will provide a teacher to come and teach the student during that time when they can't, when they're home because of an illness. Um, and that's usually about 5 hours a week that they provide. You could also talk about setting up education in different ways, such as maybe online learning. So really just working with the school and the team about that.
She
Um,
asked too about what are our rights as far as a meeting before an IEP meeting. When it comes to a student on an IEP and figuring out how the district will deliver education within the context of a student with medical needs who may have to be away from school, that really is an IEP team process to determine what that will look like. So I'm not certain what you're asking in relation to that question about what are our rights as far as a meeting before an IEP meeting. And I'm going to take a guess here that sometimes one person at school or principal or administrator will reach out and want to solve a problem that may or may not be an IEP team issue to address. So if it relates to the IEP and your student's educational plan, you do have the right to have that IEP meeting to make sure it's in the context of the full team there who can listen to and speak into your student's specific needs and make sure that that plan is individualized in a way that provides him with a free and appropriate public education, maybe in the context of some of the suggestions Karen just made, given the medical restrictions.
Is there a difference between IEP and 504? Yes. Both 504 and IEP provide accommodations, and IEP provides also specialized instruction where 504 doesn't have that piece. 504 plan falls under the Office of Civil Rights legislation, and an IEP falls under the Department of Education. A 504 requires a diagnosis or some, proof of disability, where an IEP would require an evaluation and a criteria checklist to see if a student meets criteria for an IEP. 504 also has an evaluation process, but it's much less comprehensive. It's more just showing that the disability noted does have an impact on learning or attention or something else throughout the day. There's different protections under both. It really just depends. Sometimes families who their student does not qualify for an IEP may choose to do a 504. Some students do really well with a 504 and don't need the more intense services of an IEP. So it really just depends on your student. But again, give us a call, and there's also information about this on our website. Do you have email templates for written disagreements following the IEP meeting? We also requested an FBA. We had to email them to ask about their action plan after the FBA was presented and found that the action plan presented was inconsistent and vague. So the first part, so yes, we do have some templates. So, if you call and talk to an advocate, I don't know if I don't believe those are on our website. I'm not sure, but we do have some templates for asking for a prior written notice, disagreeing with something. Also, we have a template for reporting bullying to the school. The FBA, again, that is part of it is an evaluation. So you have the right to disagree with the results, or if they put together a behavior support plan following the FBA, you can disagree with that or ask for changes to be made to that document. And again, if they refuse, ask for that prior written notice. That's really that that key piece to keeping in the process. Parents know our children best, however, our opinions tend to be overlooked. I know it can really definitely feel that way often, but just remind the team that you are part of the team. In fact, you and your child are the most important parts of the team, and just share those concerns. I'm feeling that my voice is not being heard. I'm feeling, and again, data is important. If you have other data or are able to challenge their data, um, keep it to that. And an example of that, again, asking those pointed questions, I've been in meetings before where a parent has said, I see all this data that you have about my child and all of these things that my child is doing and behaviorally not on task. I don't see the positives. Where's the data about where it's not happening? Where's the data about what my child is doing well at? So again, ask those questions so that you get a more comprehensive and balanced look at your student. Another person is feeling the same and also experiencing the shortage of paras. It's a huge issue, especially this year. We get a lot of calls about schools saying we just don't have the staff. There is MDE on their website has, and you can call us if you want a copy of this, or you could look on their website, but they provided a question and answer about schools' obligations to provide services, even in light of staffing issues. Some of the language that we use with that is, yes, we understand that you are short-staffed and my child still has this need. How are we going to work together creatively to meet that need? And just keep pushing that. Let's see. Loud noises can't stop everyone from yelling. They are being unhelpful. Okay, I think that was related to the level 4. What kind of disability must a child have to have an IEP? So there are 13 different disability categories, and I just want to stress that those disability categories are not diagnoses. So for example, there are students who have a diagnosis of autism in the medical world who do not qualify for the ASD disability in the special education world, and vice versa. We've seen kids who are not diagnosed by their medical doctors with autism, but do meet criteria in the checklist for an IEP. Those 13 different disability categories range anything from students who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, um, all different things. I would say the most common disability categories for students with mental health or behavioral challenges are other health disorders, emotional behavior disorders, and that ASD autism category. I have had a few students on IEPs under traumatic brain injury, if that is what has been caused the behaviors. So again, if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. But just want to make note again that there's just so parents don't expect, well, my child has this diagnosis, why can't they get an IEP? So yeah, go ahead, Jeannie.
I just want to add in that other than ADHD, a student doesn't have to have a diagnosed disability um, from an outside provider in order for you to request evaluation for IEP services. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. Some parents are not. They believe they have to have an outside diagnosis first to bring to the school. Um, if you have concerns, you want to express your concerns to the district. How do you feel a potential disability impact might be affecting your child's ability to access their education? So, and as Karen said, you can reach out to talk to us about clarification on this because some of these questions are complicated and, and multifaceted.
How can we bring these topics to attention to parents, for example, support groups or at a local library? Again, direct them to our website, our YouTube channel. These workshops are recorded so they can look at those. Also, if you go on our website, it'll show upcoming workshops. So if you are doing a support group, you can let parents know that these workshops are upcoming. Uh, see. What would you recommend as the best approach for professionals assisting parents with making requests of addressing IEP behavioral concerns with the school staff? Again, knowing about that prior written notice that we talked about today, that's really big. We do sometimes get calls from professionals who are, working with parents who want to better help guide them. We do, prefer to speak with parents since we are parent advocates, but I've had meetings before with, a conference call with a professional and the parent. But again, our website, and these workshops are a wealth of information that you can share with the parents, and also just telling the parent to call Pacer. That can also be helpful. We're happy to work with them.
And
Do you
learning
provide? Yeah, go ahead.
learning the special education system, like we were talking about earlier in this presentation, the more the parent knows about the special education process and their rights, the more effective and efficient they'll be in their advocacy efforts. And as Karen mentioned, we will sometimes work with or communicate with outside professionals. We work primarily directly with parents, but if a parent is on a call or a meeting with us with an outside professional, we can communicate with them together. And sometimes that's really helpful for outside professionals to be able to come alongside a parent who may be struggling or having disability challenges of their own that makes it difficult for them to learn about the special education process and how to exert their rights. So that can, thanks for asking the question, thanks for doing the work that you're doing, but I would encourage learning as much as they can, as much as you can about the special education process to really equip that parent to be effective as an IEP team member.
Do you provide advocacy support if the child hasn't been receiving IEP services yet? Yes. So we help, we can help advocate for getting services that may be needed. So you don't have to wait until you have an IEP to give us a call. Lots of thank yous for our time. Stay warm this week to everyone else as well. Let's see, there's one more question, so let's do that, and then I think we'll have to be done. My son has been on an IEP since kindergarten due to physical disability, and all IEP goals are related to physical disability. Last 2 years, he has scored academically low and is receiving standard intervention services. In the past year, he has received both ADHD and ASD diagnosis. The school is about to do the reassessment this spring. How can I ensure the school is reassessing not only the physical disability, but also if there's learning disability? Great question. So before a school proceeds with an evaluation, there should be what's called an evaluation plan. If you have not seen that, ask to see that, and usually you need to sign off on that. So when you're doing, looking at that, you want to make sure that it's comprehensive. So the physical disability, you want to make sure they're looking at academic, social, emotional, cognitive, and anything else. If you're feeling that there should be speech and language looked at, if you're feeling that sensory profile should be done. So that's that opportunity to look at that plan and make sure that it's comprehensive. If they've already, if you've already signed off and they do an evaluation and you get it back and you don't feel it's comprehensive, you have the opportunity to disagree with that evaluation as well. And we can help you through that process. So anything else to add on that one, Jean?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, when you've requested evaluation or if the district has proposed evaluation, prior to that prior written notice being written up that has the evaluation plan in it, if you're able to reach out to the case manager or to the team and discuss your concerns before they put that plan together, that can be really helpful. And parents often don't know exactly what to ask for, which assessments to ask for, what specific category criteria to consider, and you don't need to know any of that. I always encourage parents to just kind of sit down and sometimes close their eyes and just let the observations come to mind. Where do you see your child struggling at school? In any area that may be an impediment to their ability to access their education. So not just academics, not just the physical disability that you're referring to, Mary Lee, but are there social communication challenges? Are there peer relationship challenges? Are there, as Karen mentioned, sensory, other things? Write down in your own words the struggles that you see with your child. And then when you speak with the case manager or the team, you can say, these are the concerns. Here's where I'm observing impediments for my students' ability to access their education. I would like to see assessments included in the evaluation plan that reflect these concerns. And then the team will determine which assessments to use, and what to put in that prior written notice. When you receive the prior written notice, it may have a list of all kinds of things that you don't recognize. As you've heard in this training, there's an acronym for everything in special education. So oftentimes when you get an evaluation plan, it will include things like BASC and WISC and all sorts of things that you wouldn't know if you aren't in the special education world. So when you receive that prior written notice evaluation plan, you don't have to sign it in the moment that they give it to you. You have 14 days to, well, actually, if it's a first evaluation, they won't proceed without your signature. If it's a reevaluation, you have 14 days to agree or disagree, calendar days. And you can sit down with the case manager and say, here's my list of concerns that I shared. Can you help me line up this list of concerns with the assessments that are being proposed in this evaluation plan? That way you make sure that all your concerns are being addressed in that evaluation plan so that there isn't anything missed. Because you do want to cast a wide net with that evaluation. If you catch some disability-related challenges and not others, that student can really continue to spin their wheels and struggle, and we don't want to miss data and observations and information that could be really helpful in making sure that the team is able to effectively meet those needs.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Stay warm.
Yeah, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
One reminder is when we close the webinar, a survey link will pop up. We urge you to take that survey, and upon completion of that survey, look for a second link to the certificate of attendance if you're looking for that. So if there's nothing else with that, I will end today's webinar.